Theo Wool, thank you for joining the Terry Schilling Show.
Thanks for having me.
I don't know if you saw this, but Graham Plattner obviously has come under a ton of heat. And did you see his redemption speech, his excuse?
I've seen a version of it where he talks about his service in GWAT and his his PTSD, but no, I don't think I saw the actual redemption speech itself.
I watched it and I was blown away by it. He has this narrative, and you agree with it or don't, right? Don't like his policies or not. He says, look, the media, my political opponents, they're looking for that one moment in my history to define me for the rest of my entire life. But I want to tell you, I've changed. And I believe that if we believe that America can change, that if a nation can change, that if a nation can be redeemed, then we also have to believe that individuals can be redeemed and changed too. And he's onward to the next thing. He's talking about his political agenda, how he's going to help the people of Maine, how he's going to help turn this country around. And I'm still seeing so many conservatives and Republicans attacking him for his tattoos, for his misogyny, which, fine, you should be attacked by that. But we have to start attacking, in my opinion, my humble opinion, I think that unless Republicans have a proactive agenda that's going to serve the interests and address the concerns of voters, we're going to lose. Voters don't care about what you've done in the past. They care about what you're going to do for them in the future. That's just my take on American voters.
Yeah, I think in Maine, I agree with that entirely. I think pointing out the hypocrisy of the left doesn't really advance much. It doesn't win you an election, but it also doesn't persuade the left, right? Like the law of non-contradiction isn't something that the left is really preoccupied with. That laying in bed at night, oh gosh, I've just again created a contradiction.
I can't violate my principles.
Right.
I
said believe all women, but now I'm saying don't believe the people who've come forward saying Graham Plattner, is a filthy scumbag. I don't think hypocrisy is as a political tool as effective as so many consultants and the Republican electoral class think it is. I think you're right that it's about policy, but not in the DC wonky way. I think there are some very visceral things that Americans keep expressing again and again over the last, really, I mean, in some ways it goes all the way back to 2000 and the contested election between Bush and Gore, where you're getting this very clear feedback from the American people, which is something's profoundly wrong in our country.
Yes.
More and more young people who are raised, potentially, let's hope, in intact families, cannot afford to buy a home and stay rooted in the place where they were raised. And now you and I both know there have been any number of publications just on this one issue who have said, oh, well, tough luck. You were raised in a burnt out, hollowed out, closed up, boarded up city. You got to go where the jobs are. But you and I both know the knock-on effects of that, of depriving grandchildren of an intergenerational relationship with their grandparents, of severing the ties to a rooted place. Soil does matter. It does matter because it creates a primordial tie of no, I don't want another Panera Bread built here because this was my grandfather's farm, or this is where we used to play t-ball. And all of that, I think, ties into this notion, I mean, if we can get theological for a moment, which would be, we are personified people like our Lord, who came in a particular body at a particular time in the history of the world. Same with us.
Yes.
And saying tough crap, you were born into a bad city, you got to go to New York and get a job. The cascade of problems that has created in the cost of housing, in the demand for more government programming for things like paid family leave or universal pre-K and child care, the reliance on foreign labor, all of these things have in their root this profound misidentification of what the American people are actually asking for from their governing elite. And I think, Plattner, I think he's kind of fake, right?
Of course. He wears Patagonia as an oysterman. That's any Mainer.
As an oysterman,
yeah.
Right. And having grown up in a working class family, it's exactly, Patagonia. Come on,
you can't
dude.
afford Patagonia.
You can't afford Patagonia. And it wouldn't hold up on a job site. So I think he's fake, but similar to the same kind of shtick that Fetterman carved out for himself. we will dismiss it on the right to our own peril. Oh, he's wearing the gym shorts and the sweatshirt. It's at least an attempt to acknowledge that the prototypical politician or policy wonk in DC has failed, has profoundly failed the American people, but also that like it's played out. That archetype is like whatever junk I may be buying down this aisle, I would still prefer to shop down this aisle than that over there.
Yes. One thing, okay, if I didn't need to say it, I probably don't need to say it, but I hate communists. They're responsible for the deaths of over 100 million people, right? They lie without remorse. They're sociopathic. I think it's actually the political ideology of the actual devil that exists. But at the same time, you know, they tell us, oh, we're going to lower your housing costs. We're going to lower your healthcare costs. We're going to do all these things to help you. Their policies are all disasters. All their policies actually do is exacerbate the problem and make it worse, and they kill more people. But I think that we need to acknowledge that their messaging works. Why else would anyone ever entertain communism after the devastation, the death toll, and the starvation, the famines that they've caused, if it wasn't for the marketing? I think you can hate communism, you can hate the results of it, you can hate their policies, but I think at a bare minimum, we have to acknowledge that the communists are at least much more in touch with the American people and what they're suffering from and suffering with than anyone on the corporate right.
Yeah, I think that's right. Insofar as it goes, the one thing I'd quibble with is I don't think it's messaging. I think it's anthropology, and I think this is a profound vulnerability of Christians, especially Christians living in prosperous first world nations. Is again, you've sort of severed that tie to the land, to use like a Maha turn of phrase, like the seasonality of life. And I don't just mean like in the epochs of an individual human, but literally like in the seasons that come in an individual year. And when you're rooted in the soil, like we see with Christians in the developing world, you have a profound understanding that life is hard.
It is hard.
Life is actually hard for a lot of people. Now, you may have, to paraphrase a comedian that none of us really like anymore, but everyone's got their Starbucks, right? Everyone has their thing that they rely on. That's their comfort, their the cozy snack, the sort of innocuous pathology that helps them make sense of every day. Oh, I have my Nats tickets. I've got my vacation in Florida and the Keys. For a lot of people, that doesn't exist anymore. We used to have that in an American culture that was actually American, with intact families and thriving, prosperous, small towns and rural communities. There were functioning little leagues. There were 4th of July parades, and those were people's Starbucks.
Yes.
Right? It's what gave the seasons of their life meaning. And so I think the knock here would be on Christians that we have somehow lost, again, that rootedness and the need people have for little acts of humaneness, because life is full of a lot of suffering, a lot of tragedy. I mean, people deal with a lot of hard stuff and a lot of brokenness. And so I think what's appealing about the communist, the Democrat Socialists of America, the communist messaging is it seems to acknowledge that, like, hey, you've been trampled on. And they're sometimes by forces that you can't control. They are, things that maybe we can't put a perfect descriptor label on, but you've been trampled on, you've been screwed with, you've got grievances, and we're going to be your bully. We're going to be your bully, yes, protecting you and leavening out the rough spots and giving you a fair shake to fight with. And so it's partly messaging, but it's also, I think, a profound insight into the anthropology, even in America in 2026, that people are having a hard go of it. And anyone who's willing to acknowledge that aspect affirms a lot of people's suffering, the tragedies in their life, and they'll say, hell, I mean, they might be bartenders from New York and have a dim-witted hold on policy at best, but at least they're saying they're going to quote unquote fight for me, right?
Well, I wanted to get you on the show because we're in all of these aligned worlds. We're in the Hillsdale, Claremont wing of the conservative movement. but you're also one of the most sincere and smartest people I've ever come to know. I feel like, I mean this sincerely, I feel like I learn something every time I talk to you, but you're also someone that's reached some of the highest levels of government, some of the highest levels of public service, but you're also doing this as a father of 5, and you're devoted to your kids. And they're all very young, which I find admirable. I feel your pain more than most other people can. But I guess, let's start with this. What's your grade? What's your take on the state of America as we speak today?
Yeah. Look, I mean, that's a tough question for me to answer in part because, you know, a lot of people who have come to know me over the last few years or so, you know, and it's also, I think, a criticism. Some of my detractors will say, oh, well, Theo's so negative. You know, he's always an Eeyore and saying this or that is wrong. And it's yeah, and it can't be fixed. And I think, you know, I'm definitely shaped by, you know, I grew up in a working class family. I grew up with men who work with their hands for a living. And I think when you do difficult jobs for very little pay, you come to an appreciation that, like, as we said a moment ago, life is hard and things don't always work out the way you plan them to be on a job site, in the, you know, in a family, in the life of a nation. So, but the thing I learned from these men was also that an appreciation, a realist's perspective on the obstacles that you confront day in and day out, the challenges that we face, isn't pessimism, right? Like as Montaigne says, like true courage is having an appreciation. I think this is kind of riff on Aristotle, right? Like true courage is having an appreciation of the danger and finding a prudential way to confront it anyway. So I think, you know, that is the prefatory, you know, comment would be, I think there are lots of things to praise and to affirm about the political moment we're in right now. And it's not just because, like, I'll see this on X, people will say, like, well, but for Trump, we'd have, you know, Kamala Harris and things would be really screwed. No, I think there are actual profound accomplishments by this presidential administration, by many of the patriots, you know, friends of ours who are serving in this administration, that they've accomplished for the betterment.
Can I just interject real quick?
Yeah.
Because I agree with you. And to be totally frank, we were fighting in the wilderness against the whole transgender industry, the $4.5 billion industry. And it was like pulling teeth to get some of these Republicans to do anything on it, including women's sports in the beginning. But when President Trump came on the scene and he started talking about the insanity of men and women's sports, there was an explosion at the state level. Then he runs on the issue, spends the vast majority out of all the ads that he put money behind in the campaign in 2024, the vast majority of it was on that they, them ad. Kamala cares more about transgender people than us ad. And he has done more. Like, we had a list going into the Trump administration on the trans issue and on DEI and on parental rights. They went this was for the full 4 years. He got it done in the first 6 months.
Yeah.
And so we've been like, kind of like, well, what do we do next? Like, I guess let's come up with some pro-family economic ideas, which is also very important. But I do agree, and that's just one area that I've noticed. So I really have not criticized him publicly because on the issues that we are chartered to do at APP, he's been A+.
Yeah.
A+ easily, no question.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's a sense in the country that there's a lot more that needs to get done on immigration, on the economy, on bringing more jobs back. Am I wrong?
No, I don't think that's wrong. And part of it is just in some ways, and this isn't to carry water for the administration to be like a Trump apologist. I think it's actually reflective of reality.
We're not even through the first 2 years. I mean, that's incredible how much progress he's made.
I think that's exactly right. But I do think the size and scale of the problem, you just take immigration, what was done in 4 years under the Biden presidency, and it's not just like the visceral images that many Americans have seared in their memory of what was going on in the southern border. It's the night flights into LAX and JFK, where there were then these subsidiary flights to Dubuque, to Boise, to Spokane, of using our legal immigration system, manipulating it and using it as a tool to foist millions and millions of people on the American Republic who we had no idea where they were coming from. There was no vetting of what skills, what capacities they were bringing to our economy or to our communities. And so I think the size and scale of the problem warranted an equal mobilization. And in that way, I don't think that's fully manifested yet. But and the same on the economy. I think there was a lot of damage done by the Biden presidency. And some of it we all sort of saw, but again, many of these things were done under the cover of a different news cycle, right? Changes in the way banking was done, the prosecution of small community banks, the manipulation of currency, some of the rules or the advisements that the Fed had on not just interest rates, on some of the governing policies. I think a lot of these things were done under the cover, almost of night, by the Otto Penn presidency, and it created a monumental challenge. I think, for anyone who's really evaluating the administration, just look at the work that Secretary Besson has done at the Treasury Department.
He's one of the most brilliant men I think I've ever come in contact with.
And not in the limited scope that you typically associate with a Republican Treasury Secretary. Okay, they're managing 3% growth, or we can credit them with interest rates. This is a man who's also handling a pretty sophisticated geopolitical portfolio.
Yes.
Our relationship with Argentina, for example. I mean, that was masterful how he worked the situation with the Malay presidency, not just on the imports of certain commodities that have some controversy in the U.S., like on beef, but on the credit and the debt reduction. That's crucial to anchoring a relationship with a significant geopolitical partner who, for the last 20 years, was basically an wholly owned subsidiary of China. And creating that sort of connectivity between Buenos Aires and DC isn't just like, oh, okay, why should I care about that? Well, we should care about that because it's our hemisphere. It's our backyard. And so I think just taking Besson, for example, like enormous successes at Treasury that really haven't been calculated, I think, fully or fairly in a scorecard. All of that to say, where are we at as a nation? I mean, I think the work that you do, and some others, you see, I think, in a profound way, like the carnage of some of the neglect, of some of the cultural decay, whether it's on, this profound confusion about basic biology, about the state of marriage and family. And, I was asked once, like, well, what gets you up in the morning? Why are you hopeful? And I will say, Gen Z is one of those grounds for hope, because I think in many ways, they're not just a repudiation of the generations that came before them. They're also openly embracing some of these like profound truths of our civilization, open to and, in some ways embracing marrying earlier,
yes,
of having more than two kids.
No, there are these little micro trends with Gen Z that are beautiful.
Yeah, and to give an example for anyone who's not following this, who's listening in, the Pew Charitable Trust and some of these other organizations that do mass national attitudinal survey polling, a lot of them had dismissed out of hand this idea that, Gen Z, we keep hearing these anecdotes, these memes about how they're embracing orthodoxy. They're converting to Catholicism. They are going to not just faith. They're not just embracing a life of faith, but they're going to the most sort of small o orthodox expressions of a life of faith. That's all made up. That was the account. That's all made up. We've looked at the numbers. It's no more, no less than you would see in a normal cycle. In fact, the attrition rates are exorbitantly high. And recently, some of those groups that do these national polls have had to walk that back and have said, actually, what we're seeing is some kind of, as they would put it in their secular terms, some kind of bizarre phenomenon is happening here. We're seeing, religious vocations in the Catholic Church are up. The number of people who, even in sort of geographic mismatches, there are more people embracing Orthodoxy in places like Arkansas or Louisiana, not hotbeds of Greek or Russian Orthodox churches. And so I think something interesting really is happening with Gen Z. And just to put a finer point on it, I'll say, obviously, a lot of their elders will dismiss them as like, wow, I mean, they're kind of screwed because they of all people have no humane contact with life before digital age. They grew up on, smartphones and mass consumer television and, on-demand Amazon purchasing. So they're as latchkey kids, they're of a particular species, and it's really messed up. And I actually, what I see again and again in my interactions with young, 20-year-olds is they understand that technology is a tool. Mm-hmm. They also
Which
understand.
I feel like the millennials, like my generation, did not understand that.
Did not. And I think even boomers don't really get it.
I agree with that.
They can lodge their criticisms, but I mean they of many are more addicted in some ways to certain forms of technology.
Real quick,
yeah.
I have a buddy who's a Dominican priest, and I sent him an Instagram link. He loves comedy. That's something we share in our friendship. I sent him this really funny video. I think it's a Shane Gillis clip or something. And he replied, "Hey, I can't open that. I gave up my Instagram." I said, "Why'd you give up your Instagram?" That's like where we like share our videos. And he goes, "I work in hospice, and I do a lot of service time there. And the vast majority of people that I serve die while scrolling." Mm. And that
wow.
broke my heart. I mean, that is like one of the saddest deaths. My dad died with all 10 of his kids surrounding him, right? And thanking God out loud, praying for him. Dying while scrolling.
Yeah.
While scrolling. Half of the time you're receiving ads, by the way, trying to sell you stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and in some ways that's a commentary, I think, on why Gen Z has reached this conclusion. And this is not meant to be a totalizing sort of analysis. Of course, there are problems, but I think they see technology as a tool in part because they see the profound loneliness that a digital economy, a digital entertainment superstructure has created for their elders. And that's probably one of the defining sort of characteristics of the time in which we live. Why is there such low turnout in the Los Angeles mayoral election? People are largely atomized, living these sort of, hive mind matrix existences where they're cut off from any meaningful source of information. Meaningful, like, hey, did you know there's this profound thing happening in our community? And there's an election coming up where we get to weigh in on whether we want this to continue or we want to stop it. And I think loneliness as like a existential crisis, it's certainly not something Lincoln or the founders really contemplated as being like a pillar shaking threat to republicanism, small r republicanism. But I think that's where we are. And again, that's why I would be bullish on Gen Z, is because I think they get that. They see it. Technology can be a tool, but it can also be an abyss.
Yes. So I have a lot of hope in Gen Z.
Yeah, same.
And I have a lot of hope in Gen Alpha too. My 20-year-old daughter, she just got engaged. Like 2 months ago. She's going to be married by the time she's 21. She's getting married next summer. It's
Praise
beautiful.
God. It's amazing.
Dude, I'm going to be a grandpa within the next 2 years,
Which
2,
is
3
crazy.
years, right?
It was crazy.
And like my message to her was not like, hey, put off having kids, wait until you're financially stable. It was, no, start having kids as soon as you get married. Because the longer you delay it, the less energy you have for them. The quicker you can get married, find that one you can spend the rest of your life with and have kids, the quicker your life is going to be centered around your family. And I think that's what we've lost as a country.
Yeah.
Is the family is not the center of our lives anymore.
Yeah, and I would add like one line to that syllogism, which is, and then the quicker you will find profound happiness. Because this is the great project of much of the modern left, is not just to destabilize the family as the core unit of our again, our small r republic, but also sort of our culture. But it was also to convince people that the family it's not just that it's sort of a benign choice. Yeah, some people have families, some don't. It was to convince people that the family is an imposition.
That it is a comfortable concentration camp, as Betty Friedan said.
Yeah, the last form of totalitarianism you must overcome, right? And I think, again, there are so many profound consequences from how the left succeeded in that project. But one of them is to deprive lots of people of a very real and true source of abiding, lasting happiness. I know that as a father of 5, that my greatest joys they have nothing to do with professional this or that, or certainly nothing to do with scrolling or any of that. It's seeing my kids. It's sharing experiences, memories with them of being a father. good days and bad days. And I think that's, and we have to acknowledge, I would say we have to acknowledge that the left did succeed in their project.
Absolutely.
Of disestablishing the family and also persuading at least 3 generations of Americans that the family is a limitation on your ability to travel. The family will zero out your bank account. The family will create all kinds of discord and drama.
What is your bank account for, by the way, if not for your family? If not for, like, my thing is I'm trying to work with my kids and my wife to set it up so that there's always a pot of money that is the Schilling families. That is, if you need money for a down payment, well, you got to do it, but you can take a loan out, but you got to pay it back, and then it keeps growing. And generational wealth is how this country was built, I feel like, in a lot of ways. Yeah,
and again, not to get too into the weeds on this particular thread, but if you go back and you look at the story of America as settled by Americans, what you see in our history, really up until the age of mass immigration, is the story of generations of Americans making contributions to the family, right, to the nation. So it's not just Charles Carroll.
Yes.
Right? Like, his children went on to do fairly significant things in the life of our country. The Adams family, like, everyone can talk about John Adams, or, oh yeah, John Quincy, his son. Oh, Charles Francis Adams, Henry Adams made enormous, and it's not just, these are some of the stories that we know because they're recorded and they held important offices.
By the way, I did not pay Theo to do a plug for APP's upcoming America's, top American families 250th report, but go on.
Yeah, but you see this also in the recorded history through letters, diary entries of the working class contributors to our republic, that their families had a generational story that was told out not just from the founding through the Civil War into the early industrial age. That's actually the history of our country. Not this, you're an atomized individual and you founded a company and then you bought a place in St. Bart's and who cares what happens to Houston after that. And I think, again, the left has been very successful in recreating an origin story and a narrative. And unfortunately, it's persuaded, as I said, multiple generations of Americans. And the upshot is, as I mentioned, this real crisis of loneliness. I mean, tell it a different way. It's a crisis of profound unhappiness.
There's this Luciferian inversion from the left, right? They will tell you, hey, it's completely acceptable to abort your own child, to kill your own child and sacrifice them on the altar of your career or the altar of your education. If it's inconvenient, you can kill your own child. But if there's an illegal immigrant that you have no relationship to, that has no loyalty to you, that has never signed a loyalty oath or even said the Pledge of Allegiance, you owe everything to them. You actually have to pay for their housing, for their clothing, for the education of themselves, for the education of their children. You owe everything to these random strangers who aren't Americans, who aren't even your neighbors, who aren't even your fellow countrymen from another state, but foreigners who have not your best interests at heart. The communists have tried to destroy the family. And I think that the family is the antidote to government tyranny. It's the antidote to the administrative state. Why is that? Why is the family actually the threat to these tyrants? How and how is it going to be that the family gets us out of the pickle that we're in?
Yeah, I mean, I think the anthropology of this is, this isn't Theo Wold's riff. This is, this is just pure Aristotle. I mean, the family is the root, the small polis. It's the root of civilization because it is the place where, you would say, it's the little oratory. It's where the virtues are first trained, talked about, and exemplified. And this comes up. What people will ask me sometimes. Well, how come you've never written about education policy, or how come you don't get into education policy? Why isn't that a topic of concern of yours? And I'll say a lot of people have no interest in hearing what someone like me thinks about education, because my view on education would be the purpose of an education in a free, small r republic is to raise functioning, contributive citizens. It's not to create labor widgets for the GDP. It's not to create intergenerational LeBron James wealth so you have a media empire. It's to create citizens. And you can talk about No Child Left Behind or standardized testing. None of that has anything to do with creating virtue, exemplifying it, testing it, so that people can grow up to be men and women who are willing to make sacrifices for the good of the nation. So the family is that place where that happens, where the father and the mother exhibit the kinds of virtues that are necessary for our culture. It's where concepts about the integrity of fair dealing, honesty in contracting, how you mitigate and resolve disputes, sibling to sibling, how you create friendship. I mean, that's really one of the, it's not just Aristotle. Like Aristotle talks extensively about justice. What does he talk about more than justice? He talks about friendship. So it's not just an Aristotelian thing. Look at the founders.
Yes.
The founders again and again have these great sort of exemplifications of lasting, enduring friendship. Even Jefferson and Adams, who disagreed about everything.
They loved each other.
Loved each other profoundly. What are the last words? At least Jefferson still lives, right? So I think like these virtues are what happen early on. And you can't have some government bureaucrat, whether they belong to a teachers union or not. You can't have a bureaucrat teach these kinds of virtues. There's no program, there's no policy for this. It's a mother and father living their lives and exemplifying these kinds of traits for a child, imprinting them in the way that they interact with their neighbors, in doing business, with local entrepreneurs or in local commerce, and then they grow up and they're steeped in, this is the way we behave in our culture. This is what it means to be, to transact business or to mitigate disputes with a neighbor, with someone who's fighting over a contract. That's how we live as Americans. And I'll say, look, everyone's trumpeting this as people do these tours for the World Cup, and this might be my Eeyore moment, but they celebrate wow, Walmart's really big, that's amazing. That's great. But I think the more profound compliments are those that are said, wow, yeah, everyone's really civil here. I was in a small town in Alabama, like the South African, viral video yesterday. Everything's really neat. The sidewalks are well kept. People are really friendly at this rinky-dink service station in the middle of nowhere, Virginia. And it's that's what expresses American culture. Walmart, and they have Walmarts in Djibouti and in Jakarta now. That's no big deal. Maybe they're not as big, but what expresses American culture is our civility, our orderliness, our sense of justice and fair play, and the heroic virtues that have been displayed at different points in the world's history, like at D-Day when we were just experiencing the commemoration of that a few weeks ago. So I think that's why the family is not just, we say this in theory as conservatives. Oh, that's why we need an earned, child tax credit, because the family is it's the unit of everything. It's what matters. It's in a much deeper sense, conservatives really need to do the anthropology of why it's important to encourage young people to get married, to have kids, and form those stable, lasting unions.
So I've had this revelation, over the last few years, that it's not just government threats to the family.
Yeah,
it's private sector too. The corporation actually can do a lot more damage. I was devastated. He's somewhat well known, but he was a good friend for a long time. I found out that he's buying a baby through a surrogacy.
Yeah.
And what crushed me about it was that there's a profound ignorance. We all want to have our own children, and some of us can't have that because we don't have the same sexual. We aren't heterosexual, so we want to have a baby or whatever. But at the same time, I think these people are participating in something they have no idea what they're doing, because it's very expensive. IVF and surrogacy, it's incredibly expensive. But what they are doing actually is they are funding the technology that will eventually eliminate the family entirely. Once the state has enough funding to invest, they take profits and then they reinvest it in the research and development. And the research and development right now for IDF is going into artificial wombs.
Ectoplasmic uterine chambers.
Yes.
Yeah, which people would laugh at 5 years ago, 6 years ago, but yeah.
It's not, it is coming.
It's no joke.
And once that happens, the state will then start being much more coercive, because if you can design your babies, if you can determine their IQ level, if you can determine what they look like and what their propensities are, you're going to take over everything. And the corporations will do it too. You'll have a situation where corporations will buy these artificial wombs, and they will just create their own children, because you can buy the semen, you can buy the eggs, you can create your own workforce. You won't need families. You won't need other human beings, and everyone will be priced out. And I feel it's devastating because these are great people, they're honest people, but they're being fooled by these false promises of creating your own children, buying your. I mean, if buying and selling human beings wasn't enough, the creation and funding of the research and development into these new technologies that will eventually eliminate all of family and what makes life worth living is just catastrophic to me personally.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, it's been a hobby horse. You know, I was very lucky to have a great mentor and teacher in law school who was very committed to bioethics. And this was something, you know, it was like a ghost story he would tell us. This is, 15, 16 years ago now, about, the capabilities either through gene editing and cloning of certain base biological material, and then also technologically to create laboratory human beings. And we're seeing this already, like in certain industries, right? In the horse racing industry, it has now become almost common practice to clone the genetic material of certain studs, of certain successful race horses. And when you can pioneer it in one biological context, the application becomes obvious to anyone who has the money. I think, and I'll say the precondition to all of this, the step that is right in front of us, that so many people are falling into already, is the use of what I'll call it slop AI. And I think AI it's an exquisite tool. It is not a panacea, as the optimists say. It is a tool, and like any other tool, it can be used for nefarious purposes. It can be deeply dehumanizing, but it's a tool. But it can also be a slop tool. And one of the ways in which we see that now is I'm going to offshore. The individual human person is going to offshore two of the most profound humane capacities we have, which is to think and write for ourselves. To think and then articulate in speech what it is that we're thinking. And I think when you make that step and you say, well, look, ChatGPT writes my term papers for me. It writes my emails. I mean, literally, there are grown-ass human beings who use ChatGPT to write their email correspondence for them. It's only one more step on the chain of dehumanization to say, look, I don't think for myself anymore. I don't write. I don't play an instrument. I use AI to do these things. What's one more to ensure that there are no genetic or biological abnormalities or deformities, as they would say, in offspring? Let's edit. Let's clean the genetics and make sure that the child we have is going to be high IQ, without any sort of latent, illnesses or health defects, and will live a long lifespan. It's only one more step, because you've already eliminated some of the most profound humane parts of being human. So why not just create the perfect designer child? I think it's closer on the horizon than anyone will acknowledge. And who drives a lot of this? Athletes. Because it's very little commented on. I have a long-standing childhood friend who was a very accomplished swimmer, and they'll never talk about it, but athletes look for certain genetic material in other athletes. How tall are you? What's your wingspan?
When they're seeking a partner?
Yeah. And what will the aptitude of our children be for certain sports, right? So take that same
I was just looking for a hot wife, and I found one, luckily.
Yeah. I mean, right there with you. But other people are sizing up as you would at like a bull auction or something. Like, what kind of material are we getting? What will the propensity be that our children will excel in certain athletic domains? Well, that's only one step away from saying, well, we could skip that and just create it through biotechnology.
One thing I learned recently that really blew my mind about the flaws in the IVF garbage is that the female's egg actually won't just let it doesn't let the first sperm that gets there. It actually rejects a lot of, if the sperm comes across as disease or not a good fit, it will reject it. It won't let it implant. And that's not the right term, but whatever. I'm a pizza guy from the Midwest. But we're forcing these fertilizations. Like, we're taking a sperm that might not actually be compatible with the egg, injecting it into it, fertilizing it, and then creating literally embryos that are going to have to be discarded through the IVF process because it has some deformity that they find out because it wasn't compatible in the first place. There's something very beautiful and something simple about just letting God determine who enters our world and who leaves it.
I couldn't.
It's much cheaper, by the way.
It's much cheaper, and there's none of the in the current sort of phase of surrogacy. And I say this, in Idaho, it's sort of ground zero for the surrogacy experiment. And
why is that?
It's an interesting story. I think one of the tools that they've weaponized so effectively is what you led with, which is, and it's tied to sort of the meta thesis here of this conversation, which is there's a lot of profound sadness, there's tragedy for a lot of people who would like to conceive and who cannot.
And by the way, my heart breaks for them. I wish God could give everyone their own children.
Yeah.
And it really does hurt. And I will just say, be careful what you wish for, because 8 children is a blessing. Clearly, I love my life. It wouldn't change a single thing. But there are costs to it. It's not all sunshine and rainbows every day.
No, that's right. That's right. But I think what happened in Idaho was they weaponized that emotive element of the discussion.
Yes.
And it ended essentially with no guardrails. None. So like Louisiana, for example, really has some of the best surrogacy laws in the country. They prohibit under their law the commodification of a womb. Right. That can
so you can't buy and purchase. It has to be charitable. It has to be free giving.
Free giving, which I think is essential to sort of some of the legal questions we run into.
Yes.
Right. Well, we contracted for this baby. Well, she's changed her mind.
I thought we made buying and selling human beings illegal
a long time ago.
13th Amendment.
13th Amendment. Well, like the left will say that's another one of those 18th century things. We don't really need that anymore. I think so. They weaponized that, and now we have this good friend in Idaho who works in an obstetrics ward at one of the major hospitals, and she'll say, her numbers are essentially like 6 out of every 10 births happening, live births in Idaho, are for surrogates. And it's folks coming in from West Hollywood or Seattle, and they come and claim their child.
Is it cheaper to have a baby there?
No, I think this is another part of the story that's not told. It's another part of the story that's not told is there are very explicit racial and demographic components to this entire industry where people want babies of a certain color, a certain sort of background, certain ethnic mix, and then of course the obvious one that a lot of people talk about, sort of the health indicators that a mother will display, and so people are interested in obtaining these children. And when you're dealing with a state like Idaho, where you have some real significant unemployment issues, especially in rural communities, this is an easy way to make a lot of money. So one story she shared with us recently was a child was left, healthy live birth, was left in the NICU for 42 days. And it was only because the surrogate parents were unable to clear their work schedule to arrive in time from Singapore. And they came and collected their baby, and they got on the plane and flew back to Singapore.
42 days later.
So it's commodification of, and maybe this is just like, the nationalist in me, it's the commodification of something that's deeply human. It's also the theft of some of my fellow citizens. That's an American baby.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Raised in American soil, and someone just said, for this price, I can come and claim this child and take it back to me.
It's predatory by the people that sign up to be surrogate mothers, right? And I have a very dear loved one who served as a surrogate. She was in credit card debt, in immense amounts of credit card debt, and that was the way to get out of it. And at the time, it wasn't as clear as like how predatory it was.
Yeah.
But it's not rich people doing this. It's not rich people sacrificing their bodies and their fertility for other
Gwyneth
rich
Paltrow
people.
Is not, not signing up to be a surrogate mom.
But there's also something at the heart. The whole LGBT movement is problematic, especially when it comes to IVF and surrogacy. I have another dear family friend who, was not a lesbian when she was in high school, went to college, became a lesbian, got married to another lesbian, and they decided to have a baby. They got a sperm donor, had the baby, and after she had the baby, the spouse was like, well, that's not really my baby. That I had nothing to do with it. That's your egg. That's some other random guy's seed, and I don't even have a baby. This is not mine. So they problem solved. They had the spouse's egg get fertilized and then implanted into my friend. Had the baby, but then they fought over which kid was better, which kid was cuter.
Wow.
Straight couples, heterosexual couples don't have that. I mean, we joke. I mean, my wife and my kids will do something really annoying or messy, and my wife will be like, "You're your
That's
father's
trait.
child."
Yeah,
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 exactly.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's all in jest.
It's always the negative ones with me.
Exactly. But it's heartbreaking because they're searching for happiness, they're searching for fulfillment, and they're never going to attain it through that lifestyle.
Yeah, Hannah Arendt has this great line in her work on the trial of Eichmann. We always talk about the banality of evil line, but she has this one about that the birth of a child, of a human person, is the greatest check on evil.
Yes.
Because there is this deep potential for goodness,
Yes.
right, in the life of that child. And I think that is something, as you noted, lots of people want. And some people really are a victim of the you can have it all, lean in, Sheryl Sandberg culture. They prolonged professional commitments, and they missed the biological sort of window for childbearing, for child rearing. There's real sad, tragic stories. But I think as was the case in the marriage debate a few years ago, what's lost in all of this about my desire for a child, my desire for marriage, how will we reshape the law, is the child itself, the life of that child.
No, it's a lot of my.
Yes.
I.
I'm entitled to this. I want.
And it's actually about the child.
The child. What kind of life will this child have? And as I often say to young people, look, we know this isn't some kind of unanswered questions. Maybe someday we'll have science that will prove this. We know that the socioeconomic outcomes for children raised in an intact, married household with a mother and father are off the charts better.
It's actually boring. Most sociologists who study this data, it's so predictable that they find it boring and uninteresting.
On language achievement, on educational outcomes, on income and earning capacity, all of them. So if you wanted the best for a child, if you wanted the best outcomes for that human person's life, there's a cookie cutter template that we've known about for 2,000 years.
I just want to say this whole conversation took a totally different direction than I was heading, but that's why I love talking to you, because you have a broad palette and you have a depth of knowledge that a lot of people don't have. You also are an expert on immigration. How do you think things are faring here in the United States? Are we deporting enough people? What needs to be done if we're still lagging behind?
Yeah, and I'll say, you don't often get the opportunity to discuss this kind of subject, and
it's so touchy. And I
right.
just want to say, my dad was a recovering crack addict. I don't judge everyone. I want everyone to get to heaven, frankly. Yeah. I want even the worst people ever to have a conversion and get to heaven. I don't want anyone to suffer the pains of hell. As
we started this conversation, everyone should be offered their opportunity for redemption.
Yes, and I'm constantly, I try and go to confession at least twice a month. I'm constantly accusing myself of my own faults. So and I'm not naming names, obviously I don't want to out anyone, but I think these conversations are important to have, because these people are going to remain lost unless they hear the truth.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And so it's tied to the immigration discussion in the sense that, in the experiences I had growing up in the family that I did, it profoundly shaped my view of something here is not right in the way that you articulated it, a little bit ago of look, we're struggling to keep our house. My dad is working 2 and 3 jobs. He's often undercut by cheap, exploitable migrant labor who don't have to comply with the same regulatory regime on licensing and insurance. And why doesn't anyone care? Yes. This is the citizen of some other country. And sure, he's here for whatever reason. If you want to be fully charitable and say, they're here for a better life, or whatever it is, he's here. But this is my dad's country. Why doesn't anyone care about his inability to find meaningful work that's commiserate with his skill set and his ability? Why does no one care about our inability to keep a roof over our head or to live in a safe and violent-free neighborhood? And those were sort of the early questions that led me to this sort of conclusion that hey, immigration is a great destabilizing force for the American family. And part of that is also in something I think increasingly more people are talking about, which is social cohesion, which is, in its simplest form is the example I'll give to people. I was on the New York subway, and there was a very elderly woman who had a walking cane, the ones with the little tennis balls.
Yep.
Yeah. And she came in and she looked around, and you could see sort of like the grinding gears of her thought process. I remember a time in New York when men would have gotten up and offered a woman of my age their seat. Nobody did. Nobody did. Eventually she kind of stumbled and exited the subway. But like social cohesion is little things like how do we treat our elderly? How do we behave at a stadium when everyone is entering or exiting? And it's big things like what do you do with taxpayer money? Mm-hmm. What are you entitled to as a small business person? What are your obligations to your fellow citizens and what you disclose or whether you pay your taxes or not? And I think mass immigration, the one thing I always try to impress on people is it has no analog. Regardless of the fairy tale the left wants to repeat ad nauseum about the 19th century and Irish and Italians. And no, there is no analog for what this nation has seen in terms of its size, its scale, and its speed. There's nothing like it in the ancient world, nothing like it in modernity. What we're living through, as I've said many times publicly, is an experiment. It's a total experiment. And we really, some people will say we don't know how this is going to end. I would argue, again, having an Eeyore soul, I would say, I think we know how this ends. And it's fragmentation, it's linguistic, cultural fragmentation, it's economic fragmentation, it's tribal political identity, and none of those things are a part of the American story. I mean, and when Tocqueville comes to visit America, he says one of the great natural resources of the American Republic is they've left ancient prejudices behind.
Yes.
All of these conflicts that have led individual families to hold blood oaths against one another, that all melted away in the United States.
You had landlords in with tenants and what they did at the same pubs, right?
Right. And what did you see, for example, last year in Minneapolis? Right, in their mayoral elections, where the preferred candidate of most of the rising Democrat Socialists of America, the insurgent Democrats, was of the wrong Somalian tribe as Ilhan Omar and some of the other power brokers in the city. And so they put their votes, their Tammany Hall style politicking behind Jacob Fry, the white guy, because the Somali that was running was the wrong tribe. You can't get further from the American story than that kind of identitarian politics, and that's all a product of mass immigration. So all that being said, I'll repeat what I said a moment ago, which is the size and scale of this problem is so significant, it requires a commiserate response. And unfortunately, I think right now, the old arguments are still winning the day. We need this labor. These are essential people who put roofs on houses or work at the Taco Bell. And so you can't do worksite enforcement in these industries. You can't remove these individuals because they came here under these terms.
As the father of teenagers, I got teenagers. They can do a lot of these jobs.
Look, I always knew that to be true because I did these jobs.
I was a pizza guy as a kid.
I worked at a cannery. I was a dishwasher. I worked in the fields. I always hear that one. Well, you'll see it on X. Well, Theo Wilt has never worked a day in his life and try picking fruit. I did.
I detasseled as a kid in the cornfields.
So I know all of that from my own experience, but then I moved to Boise, Idaho. And now, mind you, things are changing. We're getting a lot of multinational chain retail and fast food moving in, and they have their model. Their margins are predicated on cheap exploitable labor. But the story you see in Boise, go to any hamburger joint, and this is one of those really cool things about Idaho culture. We have our own local, hamburger joints that have been there since the 50s and 60s.
I love that.
And you go behind the counter, and the fryer is being run by an American teenager. The cashier is an American teenager. The person taking the orders in the drive-up, an American teenager, and it's like, this argument I've heard for years, American kids won't work, American kids are too busy on their Xbox. It's a lie. It's a lie, just like the lie that was told.
They're busy on their Xbox because their parents aren't forcing them out to go work and help earn a living.
Or, as I often say, the disjunction is also occurring at the point of hiring, where they show up and they say, I heard this one summer where it's like, we'd love to have you, Theo, but you speak Spanish, you're into law and politics, and you're kind of a liability. We do things here that we just don't really want you thinking about or reporting on. right? So people who do nefarious things in their businesses, they don't want American employees because they know that an American knows as a sort of fundamental, like, oxygen comes into my lungs. I also know as a worker, I'm entitled to certain things.
Yes.
I'm entitled to a certain fair wage, certain hours, and there's certain things you can and cannot do to me as your employee. And so I think in the other part of this other lie that's told is we're not smart enough. Mm-hmm. There's just more talent in certain countries of the world.
It's such a joke. That they're not creative. They can replicate, they can mimic, but the Chinese, all of the Asians are not creative. Actually, they steal our stuff and mimic it.
And I think what's this is a lie. You know this is a lie because you go back and you do like the Indiana Jones archaeological project, and who invented the transistor radio? Who invented the microchip? The submarine,
the jet engine,
the telephone, electricity. I often argue the world we live in now, the modern world, and all of its conveniences. Some of them maybe have hidden dragons, the dishwasher, the television. Those were all invented by boring white dudes from Iowa, Americans. Americans built the modern world. And so this lie that it's all going to come crashing down unless we get those engineers from Mumbai or Shanghai. It's totally not true. And now again, at the disjunction of hiring point, a lot of Americans took the challenge.
Yes.
They studied STEM. They went and did the hard courses. They didn't study communications. They went and got a degree in engineering and mathematics, applied natural sciences. They're graduating with those kinds of degrees. And when they go, they say, sorry, we got the CHIPS Act money from the Biden administration, and we're going to lay off 2,000 of you, and we're going to apply for 3,000. Simultaneously, we're going to apply for 3,000 H-1Bs.
Because they're cheaper.
Because they're cheaper. And they don't ask questions, because we all know in DC, we all know the story of the H-1B. They don't ask questions. Why?
Well, they're on thin ice. You fire them, and they have to go back home. They don't want to go back home.
They're on thin ice, and what do they ultimately want? They will shut up and put up with any kind of treatment because what they really want is a green card.
Yes. And
so they'll do it till they cycle through and bring their family over and get that green card, and it's on to greener pastures. And meanwhile, the American worker says, as I noted, I have certain natural rights as an American. I also know that under the law, I have certain rights of what you can pay me, how long you can work me, what my rights are when you treat me unfairly. And an employer says, that's an HR headache. I'll just go with the cheap exploitable labor widget from India or China.
Who can't report me.
And even if they could, they wouldn't, because I'm dangling the promise and the prospect of that green card in front of them.
So I just did a whole documentary called Fathers Wanted. It's on TCN. But one of the guys that I sat down with was Dr. Ken Calvert from Hillsdale College. And I have to admit my ignorance. I love American history. I have not done enough on Western civilization and just world history. But how he articulated it was part of the problem with the Roman Empire was that they became so prosperous that they started importing slaves.
Yeah.
And they stopped working. And they ended up replacing themselves with these slave laborers. And then once those slaves ran out, they ended up taking over the entire labor force, and then there was nothing for them. So they ended up destroying their own country because they weren't having. You used to have kids to work your fields and your farms.
That's right.
They stopped having kids, and they replaced them with slaves, and then they had no one that was loyal to the Roman Empire, and that's ultimately what helped lead to the collapse of the Roman Empire. And I can't help but see the same damn thing happening here.
Well, the story, as you know, a subject we discussed in the White House years ago, as you know, the story that's been told by Republican policymakers, not just leftists, by Republican policymakers for 40 years was, it's as long at this point, it was about 40 years, was we've got a birth dearth. We have a fertility crisis. We're just not making that many new Americans. To solve that problem, we need to import a workforce. That was the answer. And I and you and many other people have said for a long time, you got this problem ass backwards. That's the total inversion. You don't solve the fertility crisis by hollowing out the American Republic, by replacing it and making it Hyderabad. You solve the fertility crisis by creating the conditions for people to get married, have children, and form stable and lasting unions. You create a culture of life. For so long, we've heard from pro-life activists, well, we want a culture of life. Okay, a culture of life begins by saying no to mass immigration, by saying no to biotechnological tools that would replace the family, and creating the housing, the environmental, the labor conditions where people say the best decision for me is to get married and have kids. And I think that, the untold story about, the fall of Rome is also like, it wasn't Rome at the end.
Wasn't Rome.
It would have been unrecognizable
Right.
to Romulus or Remus. Right? It's not Rome. And there are whole hosts of Americans now. I grew up in the first minority city in America. My childhood, in my kindergarten class, there were 12, 18 languages spoken. That's all I knew.
Can I just say real quick? I live in Fairfax County.
Yeah.
Full admission, I signed up for automatic absentee because I travel so much. So I get my ballot sent to me in the mail regularly, and I never miss an election since I did that. On my ballot is like 9 different languages.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here thinking, why are all these foreigners voting in my election telling me what to do? I appealed a tax decision that was made on my property taxes. I got a response back from some pretty app Saharate guy. Why are you telling me that I have to pay more in taxes? Where did your grandfather fight in World War II? Did your uncle fight in the Iraq War? What has your family done? We are losing our country. And I'm not racist for saying that. I love all races. I want everyone to get to heaven. But I also think that if America is everyone, then America's not America. It's the world.
Yeah. I think that's right. And if you go back, Samuel Huntington has this really good riff on sort of what are those conditions that create a nation. And in his book, Who Are We? It's worth reading if people haven't read it. Lots of people will focus on, the clash of civilizations, but that's really Huntington's magnum opus. And as you know, Huntington's not a man of the right. He's not a hard right-winger. But when he looks at this question of where is America with mass immigration and what are the conditions that make a nation, he says, well, okay, first it's racial homogeneity. But the United States didn't have that at its founding because of the transatlantic slave trade. We had black Americans and white Americans from the founding. Okay, so the second category is religious homogenization. We're not a creedal nation in the sense that was founded by Queen Isabella or Knox. We had Jews, we had Quakers, we had Catholics at the founding. So the last 2 categories, he says, are what I always sort of translate as cultural cohesiveness. Do you watch the same movies? Do you read the same poetry? Are you shaped by the same sort of foodways? And look, I went to Harvard, Yale, Princeton a few months ago. I asked people in the room, who's here has read Mark Twain? Not a single hand went up. Who here is familiar with Whitman's poem to Lincoln on Lincoln's death? No hands go up. I mean, those are our elite institutions, and no one, profound ignorance of basic American literature that any uneducated farmhand would have known in 1920, right? Totally unknown to the Harvard, Yale, Princeton types today.
Which Harvard offers remedial classes now.
Right. And so the last category is really where we have this profound debate, happening right now with people like Vivek Ramaswamy, who say the last category is sort of ideological commitment, the idea of a nation. And Huntington, I think, very wisely points out that if that's all you're left with, we have a really good exemplar of that. They had no racial homogeneity. There were Central Asians, there were Tartars, there were Europeans. There was no religious homogenization. There were Muslims, Zoroastrians, Orthodox. There was no common culture because those living in Central Asia or Moscow had different languages. All the Soviet Union had was a commitment to Soviet communism. And as Huntington points out, it gets you about 75 years, and then things start to fall apart.
It also gets you 20 million dead Christians in
as you impose your will, right, to keep things together. And so, I think we've been told a lot of lies for a long time. And what I was going to say was, I grew up with this. This is all I knew. I was a minority in America until I went to college. I was a minority in my high school, my middle school, growing up. I think for a lot of Americans, they're now seeing mass immigration for the first time. That their small towns in Iowa or Illinois have been changed fundamentally. The languages are not English. The cultural customs at the city hall are not like a Pledge of Allegiance or a simple prayer. And I think the question I would have is is it too late? Is it really too late for those people who are just now waking up that like, man, we might have gotten more than we really bargained for here on this. We're not having kids, so let's import a labor force. Is it too late to turn this around?
Theo, what haven't I mean, I could go on, and this conversation went a totally different direction. What would be, first of all, I would love to see you run for some serious office. I really do think that you could be really part of the solution here. What would be your message to Americans about, are you optimistic? You are kind of an Eeyore, but I also get a sense that you're not cynical. You're actually, your Eeyore-ness to you is actually like, no, we have to address this, and that's how we get out of it. So you have this optimism that I can say these critical things because I do believe that we still have hope. If you had no optimism, you wouldn't be the Eeyore. You would be cashing in. You would not be in Idaho. You would be here in DC being a lobbyist and running a PR firm. What's your message to Americans about your hope for our country?
Yeah, I think in this 250th anniversary of our country, I think it's really important for Americans to be proud of our culture, of our country, of our nation. We are an incredibly gifted nation that has done good things. You know, my one grandfather was a Pearl Harbor survivor, and my other grandfather was a paratrooper in Europe. And I often think about the decisions they made as young men, the places that they were sent to, the conflicts that they were a party to. And, you know, I know lots of people will say, oh, World War II was a globalist project to destroy America. Look, you're not going to shake me of my pride in what my grandfathers did. This is a good country, and we do good and decent things. Inarguable. I think the one thing I would share with my fellow citizens, which I think we should talk more explicitly that way now, citizen to citizen, is that we've been taught and told and really conned into believing this idea. We get told a version of this often, which is the greatest expression of love and courage is to abandon the place in which you were raised and to move to somewhere else to seek out your ambition and your economic opportunity. And I think that gets it totally wrong. And I know it's wrong because when I read about the life of General Washington, the story I hear is a man who had every opportunity to leave the backwater of the colonies behind. I don't think a lot of Americans realize, like, the United States wasn't just like, and then you had the Chrysler Building. Like, the colonies had, there were shortages of food, winter was tough, there were none of the niceties and refinements of life. It was hard to get furniture unless you made it yourself. People dealt with the threat of violence from Indians all the time.
Yes, fought for 400 years, by the way, almost lost several times.
Right. And so you have someone like Washington who succeeds in his early officership in the Imperial Army in the French and Indian conflict. He could have done what many of his relatives did and gone back to England. He could have succeeded there as a merchant in business. He could have stayed in the King's Army and had an illustrious career as
he could have fought for the Brits,
as some of his cousins and his close relations did. Instead, what Washington did was he stayed. He stayed in this crummy, crappy backwater of a place, and he helped build it. He built it into something remarkable. And so the lesson isn't you should get up and move tomorrow and leave behind your buried dead and your church and your neighborhood and your community. But you should stay rooted in this place and help build it up for another 250 years.
Gosh, I cannot believe you just said that. Like, I don't think anyone realizes that at the time of the Revolution, America was not developed. It was, if you wanted that comfort life, that same message would apply today, you know.
If you wanted to be an entrepreneur, if you wanted economic opportunity, if you wanted a promotion in the Imperial Army or civil service, you wouldn't have stayed here. You would have gone to London.
You stayed here because you loved your country and you loved your family and you loved your neighbors and you saw something worth fighting for.
Worth fighting for, and that uniquely American adjective, you wanted to build something.
Yes.
This was the place to build something, and that is defined when we talk about pioneers and the Oregon Trail and all of the ancestors who made where I live in the West, Idaho, what it is today. What we're really talking about is that General Washington stayed. And he built an army, he built a government, he built a nation, he built a culture because he didn't leave, that he remained here. And I think that's a profound fiction we've been told, and it's really important for young Americans in particular to invert that story and to grasp that truth.
Well, you listed off earlier in the show, you listed off the great things that America's built and contributed. I think that we get so hung up on what America has built and we forget why Americans built that stuff.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, to have their own legacies so that people would write them down in the history books. They were just trying to invent the next best thing that could alleviate their lives. Like John Deere didn't like having to plow his field, so he invented a plow that was a lot easier to plow his field. These guys were improving their lives and their families' lives for their next generation. They built this country for their next generation, for their family, not for some random stranger to inherit freedom, but so that their own children, so that their children's children, that their children's children would be able to inherit a free country and not be oppressed by evil dictators.
I couldn't say it better myself. Yep. That's the American story.
Look, next time you're in from Idaho, I need to have you back on because this is like a quarter of the conversation I want to have with you. But I've got 8 kids at home. I gotta go.
I understand that.
But
profoundly,
God bless you, brother. Thank you for what you're doing. Thanks for joining, and keep it up. Whatever I can do to help, man.
I appreciate that.
God bless you.